What's up everybody, hope you have an amazing day so far. I'm your host Phil, and today's video we're going to talk about recording drums in this environment over here. As you can see, the drums have already been placed away. We have concluded the drum recording session. I just want to reflect on what happened so far, how it went, what we have used equipment wise, and then show you some samples. But first, let's roll the intro clip. So, drum recordings have finally concluded. Now, you might have recognized in the last videos that I had a drum kit all the time behind me. That was because my band Tempest is currently recording the latest album, The Great Filter. Somewhere around, the second half of the year it's going to be released. And yeah, we recorded everything in a do-it-yourself fashion, especially the drums over here in this room. I kind of guided the recordings as the recording engineer and producer, so to speak. And I just want to talk about my experiences in this video, what gear we have used, what setup we had overall, just chit-chat a little bit along that way. Maybe you can take one or two tips from this video for your own drum recording implementation, or maybe even if this encourages you to do finally your own drum recordings, because like for years I was really hesitant to do my own stuff over here, and it's all about just getting into it and then slowly getting to know what to do and what to kind of look out for. So that's what this video is all going to be about. It might be a little bit rambling, so forgive me on that one, but I'm gonna try to put this into chapters so that it's easily followable. Before we dive into all the woolly details of recording your own drums, I do want to give a shout out to Gravity Stands. Reason is that for a different video, but still very useful for the drum recordings, they have sent out a lot of different mic stands, which, have proven to work fantastically. There was no moving at all once you set up the microphones in place. It was super consistent throughout, all of the stands, and they kitted us out with a lot of different stands. So I personally would consider the album to a degree endorsed by Gravity Stands due to this. So super awesome. A huge thank you to them. Link to their website is down below in the description. This is technically not sponsored, or this video at least is not sponsored, but still they were a big part of creating the album and recording the drums, so I think a shout out is very fair to do so. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. Let's first talk about the drum kit which we actually used on this record. We used Gabor's Sonoforce 3000 kit, and that included a 10-inch and a 12-inch tom-tom and a 16-inch floor tom, as well as the 22-inch kick drum. The snare, if I remember correctly, was a 6.5-inch high Tama Starphonic snare made out of metal. Not sure if it was a steel or a brass one. I believe it was a steel snare. The crashes consisted of two differently sized Istanbul Mehmet Shamatya cymbals, which sound absolutely incredible. We really shooted them out against all of the different cymbals in the music store Cologne, came to the conclusion these sound best, and took them with us. I think the only ones which actually sounded more fidel in that regard were the signature line from Paste, but they're way out of our price range, so with the Shamatya cymbals we went. The cymbal set is then completed by a Sabian China and an AA hi-hat, also from Sabian, and a 22-inch Meinl power ride, and then also a small Sultan splash, just to, mix things up a little bit. That kit really sounds phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of how that sounds. It does sound different than other kits which I heard. Here's a small video of Gabor smacking the crap out of it, although it's gonna be, like smartphone quality, so bear with that. Let's talk about the recording setups. We're going to first start talking about the interface setup and then moving over to the microphones. Now, when it comes to the interface, we use the Audient ID44 because it has the amazing capability of connecting two different ADAT expanders. And for the ADAT expanders, in order to like widen up the number of channels which you can use, we use the Behringer ADA 8200. We already had one which we used for the point of no return sessions. We had good experiences with them, so we bought a second one, hooked them up to the Audient ID44, and it worked wonderfully. The preamps are a little bit noisier on the ADA 8200, but we're doing here underground metal, so that wasn't that much of an issue for us. We had zero complaints about those interfaces. They worked wonderfully, so I can really, really highly recommend them. You might have eventually also seen that the in-ear monitoring rack, which I've shown in a different video, was also here in the studio. The reason for that was that we used that in-ear monitoring rack for Gabor to mix up his monitoring mix while drumming. That was like a total time saver in that regard, because I did not really have to take care of his monitoring mix. He did that for himself. We used, again, the ADA 8200. The output, however, of the ADA 8200s, we linked that to the input of the in-ear monitoring rack, set everything up so that Gabor could easily work his way through it, and that was a godsend. I have to say, I would do it anytime again that way, because it was super simple, super effective, and everybody knew exactly what to expect from that setup. Worked really well. Let's talk about the microphone setup before we then move over to a Reaper session where I can show you the respective end results which we got out of all of this setup and all of this work. When it comes to miking up the drum kit, usually you would go with the overhead and close miking the shells. So the overhead kind of gets an overall picture of the drum kit, including the cymbals, and then the close miking gives you a little bit more control about definition and attack of the single drum shells. We took it a step further based on many videos which I've seen where especially metal producers like to omit the overhead microphones and instead go with closed mic setups for the cymbals. The reason for that simply is if you want to have the ride louder or the china louder or take down one of the crashes respectively, you can do that fairly easily so because you have a lot of control, and that's exactly what we wanted to go for. Therefore, hence we used single mics on the respective cymbals. For all of the cymbals, we used SE Electronics SE8, which are absolutely fantastic. They have a very nice top end, not overly sizzly, very chimey in that regard. So great microphones for the job. When it comes to miking up the drum shells, we went a fairly conventional route, setting up a top and a bottom microphone on the snare and then just top microphones on the toms. On the snare, we use the V7X by SE Electronics because it has a very good noise rejection pattern, meaning that we are not getting that much hi-hat bleed. And on the bottom, we use the Shure SM57 because it's simply tried and tested and we had it flying around. On the toms, we went ahead and used the D series, so we got the D2, the D4, and the D6. That's what we used on all the toms. Sounds absolutely fantastic, although I have to say they have a little bit of an, like weaker noise rejection pattern, so there was a lot of spill coming in from all of the different sources of the drum kit into the microphones. If I would have the budget and if I would have the chance, I would rather use the SE Electronics V-Beat because they have like that nice narrow pattern of the V7X, so a lot of noise rejection going on, but they still sound meaty and good. I think the V7X is one of the best microphones out there which you can get right now. I'm a huge fan of it. Recording the kick drum is something which we early on omitted and actually treated as an afterthought. We did place microphones in there so that we have something which we can base triggering on. So we slammed in, I think, a Behringer B19A or something, which is that PZM microphone in there, and also in addition to that, a Sennheiser E902. The Sennheiser E902 is a fantastic sounding kick drum microphone and actually my favorite out of all of which I tried so far. But however, we went early on committing to 100% sample replacement, and we ended up using the actual sample which we already had loaded into Gabor's Roland TM2 module straight into the mixer board, and then we just recorded that and went with that. In order to capture the room, we have used two ribbon microphones, the t.bone RB500, set up in the so-called Bloomline configuration. Now, in very basic terms explained, just imagine this would be the membrane of one of those ribbon microphones. It has a figure of 8 pattern, meaning it equally takes stuff from the left and the right side over here, so it captures basically the entire room. Now, it would be one thing to just go ahead and just place that in the room left and right. Then you would get the outer reflections of the respective room from the drum kit. What we're now going to do is we're going to add another ribbon microphone pointing downwards instead of upwards, and now front to back. So we're basically having like 2 axes which we are capturing sound from. Now, as a last step, what we're going to do is we're going to tilt that so that the source, being you in that case, you are out of the, you know, like main polar pickup pattern. So you are basically in the dead spot. That means we are capturing everything around the drums. We are mainly interested in the room reflections. What we then do in the DAW is we pan those signals left and right. We flip the phase on one of those, and that will give us a very nice sounding room sound. Now that we've spoken about the microphone setup for the closed miking, let's talk about the room in itself, which we were working in here. Now, this is not particularly a good sounding room. This small corner over here has been treated by me a little bit with a few absorbers so that I'm not getting too much reflections, and I think this sounds fairly decent. But as soon as you move out over here, you're gonna have some stuttering echoes, some flatter echoes, not sure how you call them in English, and we had to combat that stuff. Let me show you one place where I got heavy reflections, where I then plan to place Gabor on his phone, and then as a comparative measurement, do a test where I usually film my stuff. So over here in this space, it's pretty prevalent when I'm doing the clap test that there's some fluttering going on. You already can hear it. There's a massive fluttering over here. I definitely don't want to have that in the recording. So I have to choose a different spot over here. And over here, it's not perfect yet, but it's way better already. It just goes to show how much a minimal placement difference can actually do. And let's now go over here and come a little bit closer with the camera. Okay, and now if you hear the reflections, there's not really any reflection going on because I got all of this absorbing material over here. So I definitely don't want to have the drums placed over there in any shape or form. Over here, of course, is not possible because I'm doing my videos over here. So we're going to place Gabor right over there at that second spot, which I've shown you. And I still want to do something on the ceiling about it. And we took different measures in order to combat that. First off, we placed a carpet under the drum kit, and we hung some theater curtain above the drum kit in order to kind of combat reflections coming directly from the drum kit to the ceiling, bouncing back and forward. Next up, what we had set up is that the couch over here is set so that it was facing the drum kit. And then last but not least, in order to basically isolate a little bit the room, you can see those mattresses over there taking a lot of frequencies out, dampening the frequency response, letting it not sound so shrill. And that really helped a long way. So you can use a lot of, you know, like I would say makeshift things in your household in order to improve the sound experience in your drum recording room. So not a professionally treated studio by any means, but it did the trick very well. All right, I got the Reaper session now opened where I wanted to show the end results of the drum recordings. Now, I got everything set up and ready to rock. Please note that there are no effects whatsoever on the drum tracks yet because I wanted to show you the clean end result of what we're getting. I'm first gonna let it run with some music. Of course, it's not fully mixed, you know, so it's gonna sound a little bit weird, but that's what we are having as source material to work with. Really good sounding drums if you ask me. Now what I wanted to show you is the bleep behavior of the different tracks. Yeah, so the bleed on the toms does not really sound good, but man, do the Audix microphones sound awesome on the toms, especially the floor tom, as I said before, has that super nice pre-EQ'd sound, really loving it. And that's worth the bleed which we're getting. Let's move over to the bloom line configuration, which I talked about before. So also a very nice sounding room, given the circumstances, I must say. And over here we also had that Audix IE5, which was placed over here above me, which was basically a throwaway trash mic. Has a little bit of a thinner sound than the ribbon microphones, which is then why I use that as a mono track, the other ones in the bloom line configuration, as I said before, and I think it sounds really great over here. So let's go back volume-wise with that one. That was at 18.4, 18.2, that's good enough. And then let's check out the cymbal microphones on their own. Now what you could hear on the snare, on the tom tracks, and also China and ride is that there's basically a lot of other stuff which is not supposed to be on that track. On the snare you can hear a little bit of the toms, a little bit of the hi-hat. On the toms you can basically hear the entire drum kit, and on the China and the ride you can overall hear a lot of the cymbal work going on as well. In order to combat that, because that is super important if you want to create a dense mix, you have to edit out all of that excess noise, I would say. In order to do that, you just go into your DAW, you cut out the respective noise, and you then make sure that via the, waveform shaper that you have nice fade-ins and fade-outs for the tom or snare hits in that regard. And I went one step extra and did that also for the China and the ride. That gives me full control over the volume of those specific cymbal parts, and also then, of course, obviously the tom and the snare. So let's check out what that sounds like. Let me just showcase what the entire kit, unedited and edited, sounds like. So we're first gonna go ahead with the unedited sound and listen to the low end build up which is happening and how it's disappearing once I switch over to the edited sound. So that is a massive difference. Whether or not you prefer one over the other, it's a different decision. However, when I add my snare samples and add all of the effects, then it becomes more apparent on why I have done all of this work. Now let's add a little bit of parallel compression and listen to the entire thing. So music and drums now. Followed by atomic rays, a fuel for vanity. Human race, a war with God, creating hell on earth. That first into nuclear rage, until the arms of death. Mushroom comprises up. And now I would go ahead and actually engage the mastering chain as well. Followed by atomic rays, a fuel for vanity. Human race, a war with God, creating hell on earth. That first into nuclear rage, until the arms of death. Mushroom comprises the bulk of the sky, nothing withstanding its way. Wrath of the fire in darkness and case, winter forever will stay. When I'm in 92, when I'm in 92, when I'm in 92, chain reaction, death construction, when I'm in 92. And there you have it. That's what the drum recording sound like over here at Pipp Studios, whatever you want to call it. Let's wrap up this video with some final thoughts and my overall conclusion. Now, this was a super interesting learning experience recording the drums once again after 4 years basically of not doing that anymore in such a professional capacity. I'm really, really grateful for all of the amazing information which you can find now online. Awesome stuff on YouTube. I learned everything basically through YouTube and trying out a little bit over here, but that's the way it should go. And I personally am very satisfied with the results. I hope that this video will encourage you guys out there to just do things. Just get into the weeds and make it happen, because there's nothing stopping you except for yourself. And even if you don't achieve exactly the same results like I achieved, you're still gonna get something done, and that's more worth than anything else out there. With that out of the way, hope you liked what you saw so far. If you did so, let me know down below in the comments. Do all of that algorithm stuff, like, share, subscribe, and hope to see you in the next video. And until then, keep it metal.